Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's hard to know where to start today. I want to talk about Brexit. I'm not sure which bit. Mark Carney utterly, just casually swatting away Norman Lamont's attempts to inflate that ludicrous claim that Article What's It of GATT would allow us to somehow retain what we currently do under double. I can't even be bothered. You still think Norman Lamont is trustworthy and Mark Carney isn't? I don't know what to say to you anymore. I think I've changed my mind about the withdrawal agreement. I think that cautious flirtation with the idea that we should back it because the no-deal alternative is so pant-wettingly stupid and dangerous is actually a little bit craven, albeit that Remainers have more or less a monopoly upon rational evidence-based analysis of the situation. I don't think we should let fear of irrational, non-evidence-based muppets push us in the wrong direction. And turns out all the car companies were telling the truth. Project Fear becoming Project Not Here anymore. European Medicine Agency disappeared at the weekend. Did you see that in your newspapers? I don't know where you get your news from. Carefully curated online, is it? Still pretending that something good's going to happen? Where have they all gone? All the people that told us there were going to be benefits, sunny uplands, having our cake and eating it, holding all the cards. Do you remember that? Holding all the cards? We're supposed to be holding all the cards. We're supposed to be having our cake and eating it. We're supposed to have been rescued from any potential negatives of leaving the European Union by the self-interest of the German car industry. We're supposed to be benefiting from the fact that they need us a lot more than we need them, and we're poised to receive 350 million quid a week, which will go directly towards the NHS. What was your favourite promise? Oh, I was looking at the vote leave literature last night, the bit where it said we won't trigger Article 50 until we've come up with a really detailed and plausible plan. So right there, the will of the people disappears. If you voted to leave because of vote leave, your mandate has already been broken. If you voted to leave because of anything that Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Gisela Stewart or any of the other characters said or did in the course of that referendum campaign, then you have not mandated Brexit because you voted for Brexit that wouldn't even see Article 50 triggered until a plan and various agreements had been put in place. And that's not a Tory problem. Corbyn whipped to vote for Article 50 as well. A plague! My catchphrase for 2019 is yet to be superseded upon both your houses. What an almighty mess. And I heard Nick mention JCB earlier. I'm fascinated by JCB. Boris Johnson gets 10 grand off them to make a speech in front of a digger, bringing true that vague prophecy pointed out by Tom Peck of The Independent that he did actually lie in front of a digger, but just not the diggers at Heathrow that he promised the voters of Uxbridge he'd lie down in front of in order to prevent the third runway from being built that is, of course, being built. Boris Johnson just disappeared on the day that the vote was before the House of Commons. What else have you got on the list? JCB. 60 grand for David Davis. He's giving them advice. Now, if I were to open up the phone lines in all seriousness at 6 minutes after 10 on this rather jolly Wednesday morning and ask you what you felt David Davis was qualified to advise on, what do you think David Davis is qualified to advise JCB on? Middle-ranking manager at a sugar company. Slightly odd politician. JCB, David Davis. 60 grand he's getting. He's getting 3 grand an hour for 20 hours worth of advice. Now, as I understand it, he's not allowed to tell private interests about anything Brexit related until 12 months after resigning as Secretary of State for leaving the European Union. Anyone? Bueller? No. Well, 60 grand. Daniel Hannan's on the payroll at JCB as well, and I can't find out anything about what they're up to. I know they're building a massive new HQ in Cologne for JCB Germany, but I don't know if that's related to Brexit or not. And I know that they're not turning up at a big trade fair that they would normally be expected to be at, and the industry is very confused as to why. But a few people have suggested that it might be, given that the trade fair happens next month, I think, after March the 29th, then if we do crash out with no deal, then we become a third country. And as I beg your pardon, as Kieran the van driver has explained to us many times over the last few months, if we are genuinely a third country, if we crash out under the ludicrously misnomered WTO terms, then getting stuff in and out of continental Europe will be very, very tricky. I don't know if that's the reason why JCB aren't going to one of the main trade fairs for people who sell stuff what JCB sells, but I know that's a theory that's been offered up. Car companies warning Mini might leave, shifts at Nissan being reduced, electric cars in Ellesmere Port not going to be invested in until they know what's happening. I'll tell you what really interests me. And I use the phrase advisedly because I know it was a phrase that appeared on a despicable Nazi-influenced poster that was unveiled by a despicable human being just hours before Joe Cox was murdered. But everybody does have a breaking point. We'll never know whether that poster unveiled by Nigel Farage was actually Joe Cox's murderer's personal breaking point. We'll never know for sure. You may suspect it, but you'll never know for sure. But breaking points can be tracked and measured, actually. And I just wonder, nice people, thoughtful people, decent people, who've been so horribly let down and insulted by Brexiters, what was your breaking point? Because what I find astonishing about the polls is how little movement there has been. It is now actually commonplace to encounter people who claim that they voted consciously and deliberately for no deal. So we spent 6 months listening to people tell us about these brilliant deals we were going to get. Literally 6 months. Some of us sat here with a degree of scepticism. But we spent months being told by people like Liam Fox and Michael Gove and Boris Johnson and Daniel Hannan that we would hold all the cards. That's a Michael Gove quote. The morning after the vote, we would hold all the cards. Digby Jones, who I hesitate to mention in polite society, so utterly ridiculous is the pudding-faced imbecile's contribution to public life. But Digby Jones, he knew for sure how the German car companies would behave. He knew for sure how Ford would behave. We've dug that clip out as well. And now people that followed them through the voting booths are claiming, quite falsely, quite dishonestly, utterly deceitfully, that they knew what they were doing. And I think those of us who are both in it and out of it, it's kind of my job. I'm in it because I live in Britain, and the damage that is being inflicted on our country by some profoundly sinister and or incompetent individuals will last for generations unless a miracle happens now. But I'm also outside it because it's my job to watch and report, albeit from a fairly robust position and perspective. I find it genuinely astonishing that people are still putting effort into pretending that things haven't gone appallingly. I would have thought we could all agree on that. The problem is that people like me will say, yeah, but how else did you think things were going to pan out? And that's the point at which it begins to sound a bit like, I told you so. So if you listened to this clown in the run-up to the referendum, and you now know that everything he said was wrong, why are you still on his side? Start with Digby Jones.
Germany sells 1 million cars a year in Britain. So the first time that this Frenchman who's going to be negotiating for Brussels says, well, we're going to put 10% on tariff on every Jaguar that's sold in Berlin, I sincerely hope that the Brit doing it the other way will say, well, then there's 10% on every BMW sold in Britain. And the moment that happens, and every Audi, and every Mercedes, and every Fiat. So the moment you say, well, I'm sticking a 10% tariff on every Focus that's made in Valencia and sold in Birmingham, I sincerely hope that the boss of Ford, well, I know I'm right, the boss of Ford, the boss of Audi, the boss of Mercedes, straight into Merkel, saying, what are you doing? And I think it'll be zero tariff, not because Britain wants it, but because it's in no one's interest that it doesn't happen.
You might not have known what a ridiculous individual he was at the time. He was always popping up in studios, always popping up on telly. Now you do. Why are people still on his side of the argument? 0345 6060 973. And that, I think, is my starter for 10 this morning, literally. You see, 12 minutes after 10, starter for 10. No? All right. Needs a bit of work. That's my starter for 10 this morning. Why do you think, now that pretty much every claim, every promise, every pledge has been broken, either inevitably or not, it's either inevitable or it's incompetence, you know my view on this, is very much that the determination to leave the customs union and single market, which Theresa May understood even when her Brexit-supporting cabinet colleagues were arguing the opposite. She understood all along that would mean that would be necessary if they cracked on with abolishing freedom of movement. This notion of control is now absurd. You've seen the latest attempt to persuade Labour voters to back her withdrawal agreement. They're saying, no, we promise we'll keep the European Union directives on workers' rights. It's actually a doubly deceitful pledge because, of course, there's nothing to stop subsequent governments from tearing it up and throwing it away. So the people that told us in the run-up to the referendum that the European Union wasn't responsible for protecting workers' rights are now telling us to vote for the withdrawal agreement because we will keep the protections of workers' rights that the European Union provides. You heard perhaps John Humphreys earlier this morning on Radio 4 completely misunderstanding, as many people do, the meaning of the word sovereignty. What the European Union provides is a baseline of protections on how many hours you can work and sundry other workplace terms and conditions. Every member state is free to go further. But no member state, if they want to trade within the single market, no member state is free to go lower. So where do you want the baseline? Higher or lower? It doesn't matter. You want it to stay where it is, which is why the British government is reduced to now trying to persuade the British Parliament to vote to keep the legislation that we were part of enacting, passing and drafting as members of the European Union. Everywhere you go now, it's bonkers. I've gone through a few weeks. I've spent 2.5 years hoping that I was a bit thicker than I thought, hoping that there was some massive thing I hadn't seen and didn't understand that would drive a coach and horses through my somewhat pessimistic analysis. But we've now got 24 days to go. The German car industry, I think we can all safely agree, are not going to come galloping to our rescue because somehow, well, Digby Jones, blob, blob, blob. It's just not going to happen. Everywhere you look, you saw the cancer test warnings yesterday from the Royal College, not from, I don't know, some gob on a stick on your radio, warning that there will be delays to cancer tests. It might pass, but that means then the best case scenario is we might get back to how we are now, quicker rather than slower, sooner rather than later. And still the needles barely budge. So, psychologically, politically or other, why? Now that every single promise, every single pledge, every single prediction of positivity, every measurable improvement to our lives that Brexit has promised us was just around the corner, every single one has fallen apart. Some of the key architects of Brexit have fled the country. Why are we still doing it? 0345 6060 973. Because if you're lying to yourself about what you voted for and why you voted for it, you don't get the right, I don't think, to claim a mandate. This is the point, isn't it? I think, for me, because my vote in the Brexit referendum was defined in large part, not entirely, but I was just as ignorant as everybody else, or almost everybody else was, about the benefits of membership, or many of the benefits of membership. Mine was a very personal decision. I looked at the people lined up on the other side of the argument, and I just saw a bunch of fraudsters, racists, pantomime toffs, and in my own profession, some principled people who had honestly persuaded themselves that we'd somehow be better off out, but also some people who are so finely tuned to the Kelvin Mackenzie school of tabloid rhetoric, where you treat people like racist ignoramuses and they thank you for it. There's a cracking quote. It's indeed in my own book. If you want to understand that mindset, it starts off with him saying, you don't understand the bloke down the pub, do you? He hates the... And then several words that I'm a little bit reluctant to use in polite society at 10:20 on a Wednesday morning. So that's the thing that confuses me now. Now that, forgive me, now that I've been proved right, and they have all turned out to be hogwash spouting charlatans at best, or just wrong but still sweet at worst, why have the needles not budged? I mean, Theresa May, of course, was a Remainer. So fewer than 3 years ago that she said, I believe it is clearly in our national interest to remain a member of the European Union. Fun fact, it still is. Nigel Farage. In a 52-48 referendum, this would be unfinished business by a long way. I know it's a bit unfair to include him among people who actually do have at least a vague semblance of a relationship with the truth and integrity, but he was a key player in the referendum, so he deserves to be on the list. Same with Rees-Mogg. We could have 2 referendums. As it happens, it might make more sense to have the second referendum after the renegotiation is completed. That was nearly 8 years ago. And so it goes on. They said Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a Titanic success of it, says Boris Johnson. So if you voted for the Titanic success, well, how are you feeling now? Over time, if we left the EU, it seems likely that we would mostly eliminate manufacturing, but this shouldn't scare us. That's Economists for Brexit, Patrick Minford's outfit, working out of 55 Tufton Street. Daniel Hannan, it is irresponsible to scare EU nationals in the UK by hinting that their status might change after Brexit. No one's suggesting such a thing. So if you voted because you trusted Daniel Hannan, you probably struggled with this from the Home Office at the end of last year. EU citizens and their families will need to apply to the EU settlement scheme to continue living in the UK after the 31st of December 2020. Boris Johnson, there is no plan for no deal because we're going to get a great deal. That was July 2017. So again, admittedly, you'd already cast your vote by that point, but if you're claiming now that you knew all along there was going to be a no deal, why are you still a Boris Johnson fan? Speaking of Boris Johnson fans, another Conservative councillor suspended after running a Facebook page dedicated to fandom of Boris Johnson, which included suggestions, amongst others, that black people should be set on fire. We're going to be looking at the 14 Tory members suspended yesterday after we pointed out, thanks to a splendid Twitter account called Racists for Rees-Mogg, how many people on the Jacob Rees-Mogg fan site were indulging in routine and vile Islamophobia. Who radicalised them, I wonder? And so it goes on. And so it goes on. So why? Out of love for my fellow man and woman, why are people still pretending that these people have told them anything other than a farrago of either lies or errors? David Davis, the government has been right to help the NHS with no-deal Brexit planning. It's very regrettable that Eurotunnel seems to have tried to block this from happening. Why are we still listening to David Davis about anything? You'd have to ask the head of JCB. But you can't, because I don't think he's been interviewed since before the referendum. Ben's in Nottingham. Ben, what the hell is going on?
How many politicians does it take to change a Brexit?
Well, I quite like that, actually. Only one, actually. It takes, I think, one of them, one key Brexiter to stand up and say, look, we got this horribly, horribly wrong and we're really sorry. Stop pretending that you voted for no deal, Boris Johnson might say, because I promised you last July that there was no chance of that happening. But we digress. What do you think explains, now that all of these fibs, or errors, to be generous, have been unmasked and unveiled, you could possibly expect 10 to 15% of people to be lying to themselves and pretending that they did actually vote for the disaster that we're now contemplating. But what about the rest of them? I genuinely don't get it.
To be honest, I think it's a face-saving exercise.
A face postponement exercise, because they're going to lose face eventually. They're just postponing that day and doing more damage for every day that it's postponed.
Well, the reason I rang, I work for a company. I'm a salesperson for a company that sells into industry. So essentially, if there's a production line, we sell them spares to keep that production line running.
Right.
Now, I think what people are forgetting, in this country, we do actually still make quite a lot of stuff, otherwise I'd be out of a job. But
yes,
nowhere near what it was 40 years ago. There is still a good manufacturing industry, but what they forget is that manufacturing industry relies on the spares for it being able to get shipped in from Europe. All the main manufacturers that make spares, whether it be bearings, whether it be pneumatics, hydraulics, most of their distribution centres for Europe are on the continent. If Dover stops, if Calais stops,
or even if they introduce checks that take 5 minutes as opposed to 0 minutes now, it doesn't have to stop.
As it stands at the moment, we get a daily delivery from every single one of our main suppliers via UPS, by a DPD, whatever. Any of the main couriers, they deliver into our main distribution centre in the West Midlands, and then it gets shipped out to our branch network the next day.
And it's just-in-time delivery, and if it doesn't arrive, the production line stops. Now, I understand this, and I think everybody listening, even people who really hate reality now, will recognise what you're describing. And we go back a year when people were ringing up and explaining this to me, and I believed them then, but I can understand why people didn't. Not least because, hang on, I need to get this out because I'm going to push you in a slightly different direction. Everything you're telling us, we on this programme know, okay, and we've known for some time. Some people chose not to believe it. But now it's impossible not to believe it. It's 24 days away, and it's clear. And the car companies are proving it every single day with their reluctant pronouncements and decisions. So when you speak to people who voted leave, I can't remember which way Nottingham went, but the East Midlands was quite in favour of leaving, I think, in general. What is it they can't see that is blindingly obvious to you?
I don't know. I mean,
have a think. Pick your favourite leaver, someone you work with, someone in your family, someone you're married to, I don't know who it is. Just pick them and tell me why they can't see what you are qualified to tell them.
I'm at a loss. I've had this conversation with so many different people.
Not as many as me, pal.
Well, definitely not. But I mean, Lord Digby Jones was actually
Lord Digby Jones. Lord, that was Gordon Brown's fault. So there's no party political loyalties here. Imagine making it up, pudding a lord.
He was actually a guest at one of our sales conferences. At a company I worked for a couple of years ago. And to be fair to the guy, he's actually a very good public speaker, and he can be quite funny in sort of.
I'm sure.
And some of the points he made at the time sounded quite valid, and that sort of was thinking, well, do a vote leave, do a vote blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but they did sound valid. That's the whole point of playing them out again now that they've been proven to be completely invalid, and asking people who jump the other way, what the hell, what are you doing now that you know he's talking pudding?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the manufacturing side of things, there is a lot of sort of stock in the UK to keep them going for a while, but that's going to run out eventually. And, you know, if they don't sort the ports out,
even if they do, mate, it's supposed to be better than what it was like before. One thing I find astonishing with 24 days to go is the way that these chancellors are now trying to claim that things have gone badly, but not that badly. They're trying to claim that as a win. I remember people rang me up and said Dyson have only moved 2 jobs to Singapore, and but he was one of the blokes that told us we should leave to make things better. I don't care whether he's moved 2 jobs or 2,000 jobs. He's supposed to be doing stuff after Brexit that he couldn't do before. He's not supposed to be moving to Singapore that has a free trade agreement with the European Union while we currently or soon won't. That's what I don't get.
The other big issue as well is the fact that the stuff that we do make in this country, in the production lines, the vast majority of the staff that are doing the picking and the maintenance of the production lines are European.
And if you look at the recent polling on immigration, it's not a problem anymore. Why? Because people in this profession, people in newspapers, have not dedicated a significant part of their output for the last few months to telling you that immigrants are trying to steal all your biscuits. And people then responded. That was my first penny drop moment after Brexit, because I don't believe I live in a racist country. I believe I live in a country where there are racists who are currently enjoying the time of their lives, you know, even getting hired by us. But what you have, of course, is that sad realisation that people were persuaded that immigration was damaging their lives despite there being no evidence. And that's why the polling most recently has gone into almost complete reverse. The tragedy is, and it breaks my heart to say this because I'm an enemy of journalism that treats people like racist idiots or potentially racist idiots, dedicate my working life to arguing with and picking fights with the kind of editors and journalists who do that for a living, like, for example, Paul Dacre, ex-editor of the Daily Mail, or Tony Gallagher, editor of The Sun, or actually in the context of Islamophobia, I'd have to include Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator, who published Rod Liddell's claim that there isn't enough Islamophobia in the Tory party. That just a few months before the Tory party expelled 14 members for Islamophobia. So I'm a sworn enemy of that kind of journalism, but it works. The devil has all the best tunes. Immigration concerns now are in retreat. Nothing needs to change in the context of reality or lived experience. All you need is to turn the volume back up in the supposedly respectable media and start telling them that that immigrant over there is trying to nick your biscuits again. And the numbers will go back up again without reality changing. So that's a tragedy as well. 10:35 is the time. It has been proven categorically wrong. Almost every claim made by prominent Brexit campaigners in the run-up to and the aftermath of the referendum. That is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of fact. Vote Leave's own literature stated, taking back control is a careful change, not a sudden step. We will negotiate the terms of a new deal before we start any legal process to leave. So if you voted for Vote Leave, the official, endorsed, campaigning group in favour of leaving the European Union, they've already betrayed your trust. They've already broken their mandate given by you. The will of the people is a meaningless phrase in the context of promises made by the official campaigning group that the people followed into the voting polls. Caroline Flint, a Labour MP, who is furiously resisting calls for a second referendum, stated in the week before the referendum result, no economic deal, whatever version Leave come up with, is as good as the one we have. She was right then, and she's right now. And if you're wondering about this story in the news today, about Theresa May essentially offering MPs a chance to vote to keep all the workers' protections that we enjoy as EU members, and don't forget, when I say EU members, I mean key players in framing, drafting and passing legislation designed to protect everybody in Europe. Don't see them as some alien force legislating and mitigating either in or against our interests. We are part of it. Okay, it's why all the scaremongering about a so-called EU army is so funny. You're frightened of an army that you're in? Crikey. Wait until you're up against an army that you're not in. Then you're really going to poo your pants, you prannies. So if you're worrying about this stuff, why are they doing this? Why are the Tories trying to persuade Labour MPs to vote for stuff that we wouldn't need to vote for at all if we were still in the European Union? Here's Dominic Raab, one of the other secretaries of state for leaving the European Union, who ran for the hills rather than admit reality, because admitting reality means admitting an almighty mistake. This is Dominic Raab in September 2012. Once they enter the workplace, the British are among the worst idlers in the world. The British are more interested in football and pop music. Where do you think he stands on workers' rights and protections? Of course, you might think he's right, in which case you presumably are glossing over the fact that he's talking about you. Why are we still doing this? When none of the promises are going to come true, none of the benefits are going to appear, and none of the claims are, holding up to scrutiny. We've not left yet, and it's already been proven to be a terrible mistake, and yet we're going to press on because of the egos and the vanities of people like Nigel Lawson, who's moving back to Britain, by the way, for... Well, it would appear, or at least it is being speculated, that he's moving back. He was the chair of the Vote Leave campaign. So, look, these are the moments. I'm sorry I'm not taking more calls. We'll talk about this for 7 hours if we have to. These are the moments where I revert to being the little boy at the back of the crowd going, he's got no clothes on. He's naked. I can see... Crikey. These are the moments. So, where's that line I just read you about the Vote Leave thingamy? So Dominic Raab's line about British workers, you can file that. Here's Vote Leave, okay, on the 13th of April 2016. Taking back control is a careful change, not a sudden step. We will negotiate the terms of a new deal before we start any legal process to leave, right? Here is the chairman of Vote Leave, Nigel Lawson, 3 years later. The chair of the Vote Leave campaign, not just some geezer hanging around leaflets in Wells next to the sea, the chair of the campaign. We already knew he'd applied for a permanent French residency card. This is known as the carte de séjour, despite advocating that the UK leaves the European Union, which would deny the rest of us the opportunity to move as freely to France. It's now been reported that there's no record of his application and he's moving back to the United Kingdom. The speculation is that if he wants to retain his seat in the House of Lords, he can't be tax resident anywhere except the United Kingdom. Tax residency abroad, according to the French Interior Ministry, would usually block someone from being considered an habitual resident of France. So he didn't even understand the circumstances of his own life when he was telling you to vote Leave, let alone understand the meaning of the phrases contained within the leaflets that were published by the organisation of which he was chairman. He didn't understand the impact that Brexit would have on his own life, while blithely and arrogantly telling you to vote for it. If he didn't understand the impact it was going to have on his own life, do you think it's fair to speculate that he may have been a little bit sketchy on the impact it was going to have on your life? This is in Wokingham. Vanessa, hand me a cold flannel and apply it to my fevered brow.
I need one myself, mate.
Yeah, well, I'm not
anyway,
surprised.
Listen, I think for some people it's just too late. For me, it's like, because we campaign on the streets nearly every week, and we get the same thing. I'm English. It's become a religion. I think the EU have been damaged so much, 45 years drip feed, plus the last 2.5 years of just complete scandalous, anti-EU propaganda, that in some people's mind it is an evil. And it is an evil that has to be fought to preserve our English democracy. It's a populist.
No, I know that. I mean, obviously, I know that.
That's how it is.
No, and I know how deep it runs. But you're saying it's utterly immune to evidence.
It's immune to everything.
Completely immune to evidence. So Project Fear comes true, and they say, no, we knew all along that they weren't lying. Why did you call it Project Fear then? Because we should have feared it. And it's incredible. It's acrobatic now, this.
They are actually saying that it just on the ballot paper said leave. So that's what they voted. They didn't vote for any deal. No. They just voted to leave, and that's what they wanted.
What does it mean? What does that mean? Doesn't matter. And that's the point at which people like you and I despair, right? When you say, what does that mean? Do you know, I got asked a question. We had a bake sale on Sunday morning for the Brain Tumour Trust. We were flogging cakes. I've got cake. You don't need any cake, do you, Vanessa? I've got cake coming out my ears.
Oh, no, I'm on a minimal carb diet.
Oh, are you? So my banana and peanut butter loaf was, I'm not going to lie to you, it was not a resounding success. It was not a resounding success. But I got asked a question by an autistic 13-year-old lad whose mum had obviously said to him, wait until we go to James O'Brien's house for the cake sale. You can ask him about this. And he asked me, why... When we say we're leaving the European Union, he said, where are we going?
That's logical.
Well, it's a beautiful question, actually,
it is.
in many ways. And I mention his autism because he looks at the world differently from how the rest of us do. And obviously I couldn't answer his question literally. And I tried to, we're still going to be here. But what he meant was, yes, but where are we going? We're going to walk through a door. What is on the other side? And I think people like you and me and him don't get it. When the people who are saying, no, we must go through the door, say, we haven't got a clue what's on the other side. All we know for sure is that it's nothing like what we were told it would be when we voted to walk through the door.
But when will the penny drop, you see? Because these people are so...
Well, it won't drop now. I've given up on that.
No, I know, but afterwards, I mean, this is my future. This is my children and grandchildren. And I can't believe I'm seeing and watching this happen when, yes, every day these new facts evolve. They're facts. People are leaving. You say, it's not only the companies, it's the cafes, the hotels.
Well, College of Radiologists.
I know. And you tell people,
cancer
people are
tests.
hearing about cancer isotopes not being available. And in France...
Because you can't stockpile them.
Well, no, absolutely. In France, people I know, because we have a house there, and I've got German friends, and they're expats living out there who've got cancer, and they've been told by the government, the French government, that they will keep their treatment going, but if there's a no deal, because we become a third party, it becomes illegal. So these people, apart from having terminal cancer or cancer that can be treated, they're now not sleeping because they're worrying that they're not going to finish their treatment. And I mean, this is ridiculous. We are sixth biggest economy in the world, and we've got people that can't sleep at night because they don't think they're going to get their medication. I've got people on my team who can't get their epilepsy medication because people are stockpiling. But then, after whatever happens, plus
what do they hear now in their own little heads? And when they hear you doing this and me banging on, what in their own little heads they think? Because all I'm getting now, all I'm getting now is abuse. I'm not even getting any claims that I don't understand it or that there's all I get is.
Don't worry, we get it. We were doing a building bridge event. We just had flags and solidarity with Union Jacks. We had an Irish flag. We had and there were people in cars with kids in the back telling us to off.
Yes.
Screaming at us.
And if you said why to them, they'd just tell you to F off again. And you say, but why? What are you looking forward to? And they'd either say something that you'd pull apart in 30 seconds flat. And this is the thing, isn't it? This is the thing. People who think they've never been listened to think they've now been listened to. But when you ask them what it is they've said that we're listening to, they can't tell you. And then you get told off for being condescending.
Oh, you can't win. And, you know, as my German friend said, the Germans can see it so clearly. It's the empire building, you know, that mindset.
The Belgians as well. There was a great piece on on a different radio station this morning about a Belgian carnival which featured a float of a pot-bellied, red-skinned Englishman punching himself repeatedly in the face as it drove around a Belgian carnival.
My thank goodness, she says, you know, it's just a joke. They feel sorry for us. Can I just... But, you know, they still like...
Briefly, I'm late for the break.
Okay, this is a recent letter in the Times. Surprisingly, the EU still likes us. Without your great nation, this continent would not be what it is today, a community defined by freedom and prosperity. Britons should know from the bottom of our hearts we want them to stay. Can you believe it? After all the...
Of course I can believe it. Do you know why?
Because they know that they're...
No, you're addressing a constituency, and I can prove this with a cursory glance at my own inbox. You are addressing a constituency that would rather be lied to by a parody of an Englishman with a French name than be told the truth by an actual Frenchman.
No, you're absolutely right, and they know it too.
And they do deep down, and that's why all they've got left is anger and insult. And that's fine. But you can't seriously want to drag us over this cliff that you're now so angry and ignorant about that you can't even tell us why you voted to move in that direction in the first place. That's it, isn't it? That's the nutshell. This narrative, people who were ignored and not listened to, is not actually true. Look at the Conservative Party membership. If you want evidence of where this absolute weapons-grade ignorance is coming from now, masquerading as patriotism. But let's pretend it's true. This narrative of the dispossessed, the left behind, people who've never been listened to before. All right, we listened. You voted to leave. Now tell us why. Tumbleweed. Because all of the things you might have said 3 years ago, or even 2 years ago, arguably even 1 year ago, you can't say them anymore. Because they're just not true. And it just hasn't happened. So, okay, you're really cross that people never listen to you. I'm listening now. Why are we doing this? That was me doing my own sound effects. It's not the BBC, you know. Where the evidence is not even worth analysing anymore. It's all for the prosecution rather than the defence of Brexit. Whether you're looking at possibility of minis no longer being made here, production will be moved to Austria, it was suggested yesterday, in the event of a no deal, although, of course, that would only postpone the reality of whatever trade deal we arrive at subsequently. You've got what company is it in Ellesmere Port that said it's not going to put that investment into electric cars until they know what's happening, and then, of course, there's no guarantee that they will. Dyson's already up sticks and legged it. No longer, really, to be described as a British business person, James Dyson. I don't think he is. His headquarters is in Singapore. And so it goes on. In fact, you know, I wonder if you're even aware. And that's not a criticism of you, it's yet another criticism of me. Are you aware, as someone who's not following Scottish and Welsh politics as closely as you may, that Scottish and Welsh, the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly voted to pass identical motions calling for the planned exit date of the 29th of March to be put off. So sovereignty, democracy, whatever you want to call it, transparency. It's the first time in 20 years of devolution that the Scottish Parliament and the National Assembly for Wales had debated the same motion simultaneously. MSPs and AMs also reiterated their opposition to the UK government's plans and to leaving the EU without a deal. Wales, of course, voted leave. Scotland, like Northern Ireland, didn't. Everywhere you turn, there's madness. At the very best, there's proof that people were wrong and or lied. So why are we still going ahead with it? That's the bit I don't get. And it can't just be stubbornness and a psychological refusal to admit a mistake, because the numbers suggest that the movement has been relatively small. I don't believe that the ostrich tendency, the fingers in the ears, is the only answer to this. I don't know what is. 0345 6060973. I'll stay with this for a little longer, because I've done rather more me than you this hour. I am very conscious of that. But that's what happens when I go for a couple of days without talking about Brexit. I get constipated, verbally speaking. And then when I uncork the Brexit contemplations, a veritable flood ensues. Deborah in Bedford, I apologise for that mental image that precedes your contribution to the programme, but it's too late to go back now. Is that why we're Brexiting, Deborah?
I'm just going to talk to you about an experience we've had the last couple of days. So we've been in Calais.
Yes.
We go quite regularly across there to buy some nice wine and food and things like that. We stay in Calais, we walk the beach and things like that. And we started to witness what was happening Monday, when the customs people started to do proper checks on the lorries. And they only did it for 2 hours, according to French television.
As a test?
And doing a check each on every.
But as a test of what they might have to do in the event of no deal. Yeah. So this is their preparation.
And it was a protest on their part. They were saying, there's not enough of us and things like that.
Yeah.
In 2 hours, the backlog and chaos around Calais was unbelievable.
Well, you say that. Did you try believing that it wasn't?
I can see it. I witnessed it.
No. But I don't know. I don't care about the evidence of your own eyes. This was the party's final command. Did you know? Answer the question. Did you? Were you with Mr. Deborah? Was Mr. Deborah with you?
Mr. Saville was with me. Mr. Steve was with me. Yeah.
Mr. Stephen, did you both sit there and go, I believe that there's no delays. I believe that there's... Because that apparently might work.
No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. But I will tell you this. There was a man in the queue that had got through. He'd travelled across Europe. He'd come back from the Netherlands, a UK citizen. He'd travelled back across from Netherlands through to Calais. And I don't quite know how he got into Calais, because you couldn't actually get in unless you were... Because it was a lock-in, effectively. There was lorries everywhere. The A16 was queuing for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. And the police were diverting everybody to Dunkirk, and they were doing the same. The customs people were doing the same in Dunkirk, and there wasn't enough ferries and things like that. Anyway, we stood. We got through to the ferry terminal. We got in, waiting in the queue and everything. And it was like the Marie Celeste, the ferry terminal. And normally on a weekday, it's heaving with lorries and checks and people. There was on the ferry, when we finally got on our ferry, there was one lorry, 2 coaches, and about 8 or 9 cars on a Tuesday, which is normally jam-packed to the rummels. We were even allowed to get onto an earlier ferry, and we stood waiting to get the clearance to go on and everything. And my husband started to talk to this bloke, and this bloke said, "Well, this is a shambles. This is terrible. This is terrible." And Steve just said, "Well, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
After the 29th of March, this is what's going to happen." And this man said, he just said, "Well, I didn't vote to stay. I voted for Brexit and everything." And Steve said, "But why?
Yes.
Why?" And he said, "Because I want my country back." Yeah. And then he walked away. He wouldn't engage in an argument. He wouldn't engage in a discussion or anything.
Well, because he knew he couldn't tell you what that means. What does that mean?
Well, he doesn't. He wouldn't tell us.
But that's the point, isn't it? And I don't think we can conduct this in a way that isn't a little bit condescending, because he believes... Someone told him that they'd taken his country away. He didn't ask for any evidence or proof. He just believed them. And actually, that there's a survival instinct there. There's probably an evolutionary mechanism there. If I tell you that you're under threat, or I tell you that you're a victim of some egregious offence, that there's a sort of primitive logic to not waiting around for the evidence, but to shoot first and ask questions later. But they've had 2.5 years to ask questions after shooting, and they still can't answer them. That's why I run out of patience with men like your mate.
Yeah, but it wasn't my mate.
I know he wasn't, but you know what I mean.
But the local businesses, so the hotel we stay in, they're worried about what's going to happen. Will they still get people coming? Because most of their clients are people like us going across, picking up some wine and food and things and coming back. The local restaurant we go to, fabulous restaurant, they're worried.
Of course they're worried. Of course they're...
Customs down. You go to Majestic, I'm sure there are other wine stores available, and the lady in there was pulling her hair out. She said...
She doesn't know. I've got a family friend who's in the wine importing business, and he... Actually, a family member, and he just doesn't know. He's quite an optimistic geezer, but it's the uncertainty.
She's always optimistic, the lady in Majestic, and she just said, "I don't know what's going to happen. I can't say to you, I'll see you again soon. I don't know if I'm even going to have a job."
Oh,
and I tell you what, all those lorries stacked up, most of that stuff, a lot of that stuff is perishable. There'll be people today, the ripple effect today, because people won't be getting, like you were talking to that guy earlier about him getting last-minute bits that they order and it comes through. That won't be coming through today, or it won't have got through on Monday, and it won't get through. There'll be perishables being dumped. I mean, it's a disaster.
Do you want the good news?
Oh, cheer me up, please.
When BMW and Vauxhall and all the other companies have either wound down their operations or moved out entirely, we'll be able to buy a nice English car like a Morgan.
In my dreams.
Oh, no. Deborah, hashtag breaking news. The British sports car maker Morgan has just been sold to an Italian venture capitalist firm.
I don't know what they want. I don't know what they want.
And they won't tell me anymore. They just send me abuse, which is fine. But it kind of should be... Where's that old line? It's a bit Partridgey. Point at you, there's three fingers pointing back at me. So if you want to call me names on social media, fill your boots. But obviously every single time you do it, you're proving my point that you haven't got an argument anymore. What is it you want? I don't care. What is on the other side of that door you voted to go through? I don't care. What about all the people who told you what was on the other side of that door who've now been proved wrong? I don't care. Down with Muslims. And, I mean, we steer away from it a little bit for fear of repetition and for fear of me finally managing to make a dent in the desk in front of me as people, well, they don't anymore queue up to tell me why leaving the European Union is a good idea. Partly perhaps because I've been less than sympathetic with them in the past, but mostly, obviously, because they know it isn't now. You know it isn't now. But you still want to do it, because the alternative would be to say, oops, I made a boo-boo. And imagine how embarrassed you're going to feel about that with your friends and family, and then times it by 1,000,000. And imagine how that would feel if you dedicated your entire life and career to this, or if you'd staked your entire reputation, such as it is, upon it being good. And all of the evidence now points out that in the run-up to the vote, you were wrong. And one thing that is interesting is the way in which, I can tell this by the public figures who complain about things I say on the programme, there are ways in which now they're desperately hoping they don't get the blame for it. It's really interesting. Yeah, you've seen Nadine Dorries on Twitter saying, why are they picking on me? I'm just a woman. What? A prominent member of the ERG, a prominent pro-Brexit campaigner. Quite incredible. Digby Jones, you just wonder, how can anyone object to having your own words played out on the radio? Well, don't blame me. Who are we going to blame? Don't blame the leavers. You have to blame the people who said it was all going to go wrong. Really? Blame the European Union for being so intransigent. But hang on, the European Union have been completely upfront. Everything they've said would happen has happened. They told us what we could and couldn't do. Michael Gove told you that we'd be able to do things the European Union told us we wouldn't be able to do. Michael Gove's still in the cabinet. What do you have to do in modern British politics to actually be held accountable for your actions? Not just Chris Grayling, of course, who's now internationally incompetent. He's made the New York Times, not the front page, not that big a superstar, but he's still made the New York Times for his levels of incompetence. Do you know the New York Times had to publish a correction about Chris Grayling? And they reported that his incompetence had cost the country an estimated £2.7 million. They had to publish a correction saying that should have said billion. I think I know what happened there. I think a sub got the copy off the journalist and was just filing it for the next day's paper and just thought, it can't be no, that just must be a typo. I'm not even going to check. Anyway, he'll be asleep. He's filed from Europe. I'm not even going to check that. There's no way that a prominent politician can stand accused of. I haven't seen the numbers, so I'm not betting the house on this. 2.7 billion. And the sub-editor read it and thought, nah, I'll scratch that. Million. And then they got complaints. No, it was actually $1 billion. So, well, my bad, my dude. I had no idea that in Britain and your wonderful democracy, now that you've got your country back, cabinet ministers can wee billions of pounds up the wall and stay in post. But Grayling actually attracts fire from other politicians. That line from Michael Gove about us holding all the cards the morning after, he was categorically and completely wrong. And you know what a big fan of tests Michael Gove is? If you work in the teaching profession, you judge a 10-year-old by whether or not they can give a correct answer to a simple question. So would somebody please ask Michael Gove a simple question, which is, what the hell were you talking about when you said that we would hold all the cards? And how do you account for being so spectacularly wrong? And while you're here, Govester, why didn't you tell us that Rupert Murdoch was actually in the room when you interviewed Donald Trump? Because it's increasingly hard to resist the idea that these things are not unfolding in isolation, that they may indeed be linked. Astonishing piece in, again, I think it was the New York Times or the New Yorker, about a journalist at Fox News who found evidence of the payoffs to the pornographic actress that the president sanctioned shortly after his current wife had given birth to his son. He had to pay her off because he'd had sex with her, allegedly. But the Christians like him. And they found evidence of it, and a Fox News journalist was told, nah, you're going to have to sit on that because Rupert wants him to win. Getting your country back. Democracy. We haven't even mentioned the Russians. So, now that we see, because if I just click on this, Brexit vote offer to MPs on workers' rights, what, you mean that the EU actually is responsible for protecting workers' rights? Oh, OK, that's interesting. Royal College of Radiologists were warning about delays in cancer tests. Vauxhall saying they're not going to invest in electric cars in Ellesmere Port until they know what the hell's going on. American ambassador on the radio this morning saying that if you want to do a trade deal with us, you're going to have to adopt our food standards. And lying, a barefaced lie to John Humphreys. A barefaced lie about food poisoning rates in America compared to the rest of the world. By my very scant research, there are 480 foodborne illnesses registered by the American government's own figures every year. So what do we want to do? Oh, let's be more like them. I'm told, and again, I'm no expert, that chlorinating chicken doesn't actually remove salmonella. And the only reason you need to use a chemical spray on a chicken carcass after it's been through the production process is because the production process in America is more likely to have left it riddled with germs and diseases than it is in this country. We don't need to chlorinate our chickens because we have checks and balances at every stage of the process. And the Institute of Economic Affairs was set up by a battery chicken farmer who resented being told how he could and couldn't treat his chickens. I'm turning into David Icke. I'm seeing links everywhere. And I haven't finished yet. The Royal College of Radiologists warns doctors to prepare for possible drug delays and says there will be, or there are likely to be, cancer test delays. What do we want? Bigger delays on cancer tests. Vote leave. The chief civil servant in Northern Ireland has warned there may have to be some hardening of the Irish border if we do crash out without any deal at all. It describes a grave outcome for Northern Ireland. Geoffrey Cox is not going to be securing any meaningful, legally binding changes to the EU exit deal because if he does, it won't be a backstop anymore. It will have neither a back nor will it stop anything. Scots and Welsh parliaments, the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, have backed a joint motion calling for Brexit to be put back. And, of course, the car companies were queuing up yesterday to tell us about reduction in production and or possible relocations, in the case of BMW to Austria. So I love this idea that why aren't Vauxhall in Ellesmere Port investing in electric cars like they would do if we weren't Brexiting? Oh, it's because of diesel. Yeah, how's that working for you? Done a lot of lifting over the last few weeks, diesel, hasn't it? And then, of course, you have the fact that Japan has now signed a free trade agreement. Well, they don't need to be here. They're just using it as an excuse. Now they've signed a free trade agreement. Yeah, they've said that they might move to Austria in the case of BMW and Mini. So it's almost as if they want to produce in the European Union. What will be next? Was it Nissan warning yesterday 400 jobs could go in Sunderland? Isn't that Ministry of Silly Walks, the Brexit Ministry of Silly Walks starting in Sunderland? I don't know if you've seen any details of that. Pay 50 quid. Pay 50 quid to walk from Sunderland to London while all of the people that told you to vote leave will be either in hotels or probably on private jets, actually, if current form is anything to go by. I think, does the Ministry of Silly Walks start in Sunderland? I think it does. If you are one of the 400 people who found out yesterday you might be about to lose your job, why don't you go down and tell them how you feel about their silly walk? And then I sit here with just an increasing sense of absolute wonder. Absolute wonder. Give me a ring. Tell me what you're looking forward to. 0345 6060973. What is it the rest of us are missing? And don't just ring in and shout abuse at me. There's a special line for that. We're going to set up an 0898 number. But in terms of the stuff that would make nice people go, oh yeah, actually it's not all that bad. There is something good. Here's the silver lining. Do you remember Suella Braverman? She was a Brexit minister for a while. Remember when she was on Question Time? Do you remember it? Here she is.
And this figure of 50 billion doesn't have any legal basis whatsoever. It's been manufactured. And it doesn't seem likely that there will be such a bill for £50 billion. It's part of Project Fear. health warning, don't believe it. We pay into the European Investment Bank, and so actually we're going to get a windfall from leaving. So I think that the scaremongering about having to pay to leave is just not true. We have a lot to gain. Our best days lie ahead, and we're going to be enjoying the freedoms and enjoying the benefits that we gain from leaving.
You know what she said yesterday? I don't think it's going to be quite the Armageddon that some people suggest. She still gets booked. She was, and you have to book her. She's a politician, and I think Faisal Islam over at Sky News, shortly, of course, to move across to the BBC as economics editor, is a brilliant journalist. Sky News have covered themselves in glory during Brexit in a way that the BBC should really just be sitting at their feet and taking notes. A few glorious exceptions, but generally speaking, even though for much of the Brexit brouhaha, Sky News was owned by Rupert Murdoch, it is not an organ that he uses to influence people into acting against their own interests. He doesn't need to. He's got Tony Gallagher over at The Sun to do that on his behalf. Jump, Tony. How high, Rupert? That's, the modus operandi, the business model over there. But she was back on Sky News yesterday, that woman, claiming that no-deal Brexit won't be Armageddon. So you sit on Question Time on live television and you say things that events subsequently prove to be completely untrue. And then they ring you up and say, would you like to come on tomorrow? Would you like to come on LBC, Digby? Or that other fella, Buick, David Buick. Yes, I'll be on tomorrow. But you've been wrong for 3 years about pretty much every... Doesn't matter. Trebles all round. That's what we've done. And then they talk about the elites. It's quite incredible. Absolutely breathtaking. But what's most breathtaking of all, to people like me, is how when you are presented with a large piece of cheese, you can sit there claiming that it's not cheese. You have licked the cheese. You have smelt the cheese. You have cut the cheese, and you have tasted the cheese. It is incontrovertibly and undeniably cheese. The World Cheese Federation have arrived in Britain this morning to confirm that this is indeed a massive lump of cheese. The international fans of cheese have convened at Heathrow Airport prior to arriving to pay homage to this massive lump of cheese. Every cheese-based expert on the planet has confirmed that this is cheese. But Digby Jones and Suella Braverman and Nadine Dorries and David Davis and Dominic Raab and Liam Fox and Nigel Farage, they insist still that it's not cheese at all. My question for you, as I use my special speech-giving voice, is this. Why can't you admit that it's cheese? It's 90 minutes after 11, and it is indeed a massive lump of cheese. Why are people still denying the reality of Brexit? And it's a fascinating question, because all of the people, and I could sit here literally all day going through all the things they said in the run-up to the referendum, and in the case of people like Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab, and what's your favourite Dominic Raabism? He gets away, actually, with quite a lot, doesn't he? Because there are even worse offenders than him. In normal times, Dominic Raab would be a byword for imbecilic politics. Oh, it turns out that the Calais to Dover crossing, I hadn't realised when I dedicated much of my political career to telling ordinary people to leave the European Union, I hadn't realised how important the Dover-Calais crossing was. And it's the... Do you know what it is? It's saying those words out loud. It's Suella Braverman turning up on Sky News yesterday without anything in her tiny mind even whispering to her that she's lost the right to be listened to by the public. And it's all our fault. It's all media's fault. 24-hour news. We need guests. We need guests. We need guests. Well, we can only get Digby Jones. I don't care. Book him. We need guests. We need someone to make this argument. Well, we can only get Nadine Dorries. I don't care. She's better than having an empty chair. So no one in that process ever says, but last time they came on the programme, they said things that have turned out to be completely untrue, and they haven't withdrawn any of them. Jacob Rees-Mogg still on his Twitter account a story about tariffs that even the Sun has withdrawn. But we need guests. Get him on. Get him in. Get him on. Get him in. At what point do we return to being a country where actions have consequences? where lies are punished, where deceits are disciplined? I don't know. But I can't even begin that process. I can't even begin that process. You can't even begin the process of returning to a place where actions have consequences and lies get punished until people stop pretending that they still believe the lies. And that's the psychological process that fascinates me most. There's not going to be 350 million quid for the NHS. The German car industry is not going to come to our rescue. We're not going to be able to continue to trade as we did before while somehow removing ourselves from the requirements of freedom of movement. It turns out, they don't need us more than we need them. They are prepared to see us suffer because they prioritise the integrity of the union and the single market more than their concern for our welfare. They're going to suffer themselves to protect that. The British border in Ireland is a massive, massive sticking point in this process. The American government is going to insist that we abandon the food safety regulations that are the envy of the civilised world. All of these things we are going to have to pay to leave, regardless of what agreements and deals are in place, because if you think you're going to be able to sign shiny new trade deals when you've reneged on your responsibilities to the last people you had a trade deal with, then you're even dafter than Digby Jones. And I say that very, very advisedly. It's a vicious insult to lay at someone's feet. But the evidence now, and I've held off on this until 24 days before Armageddon, the evidence now is utterly incontrovertible. Unless it isn't. That's the bit we don't get. Ian in Leeds, if you're still awake, Ian, I think it's important to point out at this juncture that although I am now taking a call, such is the state of my sensibilities at this point in time, I'm fairly confident I could carry on talking until, well, halfway through Eddie Mair's show at the very least. So you better interrupt me quickly.
Well, yeah, I dare say you could, yeah. I mean, maybe one point you're missing is the fact that maybe it's not cheese, maybe it's mock cheese, or maybe I can't believe it's not cheese.
I can't believe it's not cheese. It's cheese. Yeah, it's vegan cheese.
Perhaps. But look, here's the point. I think that for some people, the principle of a referendum is actually more important than the outcome, irrespective of how bad the outcome might be. So it's the transaction that's important and not the actual product. So it's like if you go into a sandwich shop or a restaurant and you buy a sandwich or you buy a meal and it's terrible and you end up emptying your guts 10 minutes later.
Thank you.
You're not going to go and complain because you say, well, I paid good money for this. I'm going to eat it down to the last crumb.
I mean, let's work on your analogy because I like it. But the emptying the guts is problematical in this context. It's more when it arrives on your table. You've ordered. Okay. Hang on a minute. I'm working. I'm the king of the analogies. I'm helping you out here, Ian. You walk into the restaurant. You sit down. You order a meal. You don't normally get to eat in restaurants. No one's ever actually given you a menu before. You've never been able to choose your own restaurant meal before. So you order scampi and chips, and they bring you some gravel.
Yes.
Brexit is saying, well, I'm going to eat that gravel and I'm going to pretend I'm enjoying it, and not only that, but I'm going to pretend I voted for gravel all along. Who the hell wants scampi and chips anyway? Project Fear.
Yes, that's a good modification of my analogy, yes. Because people have to now pretend that is what they wanted in the first place. So hence I knew what I voted for all along.
Gravel.
In which case, then you have to bear responsibility. It's as simple as that.
But why did you vote for gravel? Shut up, you lost, get over it.
And I also think that people have been not just misled, we can all agree on that, but I think they've been told that because Brexit is the most important thing they've ever done in their lives, they're holding on to it with a vice-like grip. So it's almost become so personal that if you criticise Brexit, it's almost like criticism of them. It's almost like you're criticising their mother. You're calling their mother or their wife or whatever, nasty names.
And that's the thing that you're either feeling or not feeling, and that's when we come back to, as we so often do, this psychological evolutionary mechanism whereby if I tell you that you're under threat, you shoot first and you ask questions later, and once they've shot, Once they've ordered scampi and chips, even if gravel arrives on the table, they cannot retrospectively acknowledge that they've been mugged, conned, served gravel.
Yes, but I also think
hang on, I want to get this out. No, actually, you talk. I've said enough.
No, I also think that there is also a self-harm element to this.
That's coming.
I don't know what percentage of Leave voters this represents, but I'm just minded of something that my brother overheard my brother saying a few weeks ago, where he basically said Brexit does not affect him, even though he's a type 1 diabetic.
Who needs insulin?
Yeah, so that is what he said. Brexit doesn't affect me.
Do you remember that advert years ago when, I think it might have been for trade unions, it said politics doesn't affect me, and then they just listed all the things that are politics, from schools and hospitals right down to flipping road markings. It was a really powerful advert. Obviously it didn't work because we've done Brexit, but that's the same mindset, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Did he vote Leave?
I'm not sure. I see. The reason why I say that is that I suspect he might have done, but he never said he did.
Right, got you. Yes.
And I think that because there are certain things that have happened in his life, which I won't go into, I think he's feeling perhaps somewhat aggrieved and angry at the world, and he maybe is seeing.
But here's the weird thing, and as some sort of corrective to the things that have made him aggrieved and angry, but they're getting more aggrieved and angrier every day, the ones I have to deal with. That's the weirdest thing, this morphing in the space of 2 years from, ha-ha, you lost, get over it, to, shut up, we're leaving, get on with it, shut up. It's almost as if stop pointing out what a bozo I've been is going to be the next chapter. And the self-harm is perhaps an inevitable upshot of that, where people will start being like Opus Dei, that Catholic organisation that I think are into sort of hair shirts and self-flagellation. It's good for the soul to suffer. That's the next thing they'll sell to us. And it'll be people like Rees-Mogg selling it, who will do precisely zero suffering. But he'll tell the peasants that suffering is good for you.
Yes.
Cheap shoes.
Well,
Ian, what are we going to do? Do you know Lawnswood?
Lawnswood, yes.
Is it near you?
No, it's not. I don't think it's not near me. No, but I know of it. Yeah,
that's where one of my grandma's pubs was.
All right.
I've just been researching a little bit of family history. So I've got the White Cross in Pudsey, which isn't there anymore. That's sadly abandoned. But there's some lovely old photos of when my grandma was in charge. The Market Tavern, opposite the market, that isn't there anymore. They're all Tetley pubs, and the one that's still there is the Lawnswood Tavern, which I've looked it up. I'm going to take the kids there for lunch next time we're in Leeds. It looks quite posh, mate. It looks quite smart. I just thought I'd bring you up to speed with developments on the O'Brien genealogy researches, because, it's better than talking about Brexit. Will we continue talking about Brexit after this? I don't know. Is anyone going to tell me what I'm supposed to be looking at? I mean, it's quite incredible. I think we'll probably move on, won't we? Unless we're squeezing at the wire, somebody who can tell me why, despite all of the things you were told not coming true, you're still on side, okay? And I'm afraid, unfair though it may be, you don't get to come on the show and claim that you knew this was going to happen all along and you voted for it unless you've got documentary proof, all right? So you need to send me a photograph of you holding up a dated testimony saying the car companies are going to leave, cancer tests are going to be delayed, Dyson is going to move to Singapore, Nissan is going to shed jobs, production is going to be called off in various places, BMW might move to Austria, we're going to pay £39 billion, there's not going to be 350 million quid for the NHS, the German car company isn't going to come to our rescue. So if you can prove all of that, then you can come on and tell me that you knew this was going to happen and you voted for it.